Greetings, my name is Melanie Blow. I am a friend of Professor Wolfley and the Chief Operating Officer of the Stop Abuse campaign. And today we're going to be talking about the transition from a victim to advocate and why it is that more people don't do it and why it is that we live in a world with a whole lot of victims and we haven't changed the world yet. So for a little bit of background, I am an incest survivor, a survivor of a lot of miscellaneous types of child abuse. And I have, through a very long and particular process, I have built my life around advocacy for children's issues. And and been heavily involved in statute of limitations reform, which in New York we're going on our 11th year of trying to eliminate the statute of limitations, which makes most child sexual abuse unprosecutable and keeps most sex offenders on the street. So that's not a good thing. So why does this happen? We've all seen Oprah Winfrey. We've all seen some TV show where there's a survivor and they talk about how their abuse and how horrible it was and what they're going to do to try to fix it. A corollary of that I was just talking with someone today who's going through this is the parent who loses their child to child abuse and they're bound and determined, or the grandparent or aunt, uncle, whatever, someone who had a child very near to them who was killed through abuse, and they are bound and determined to keep that from happening to somebody else. And they go into this with the best of intentions. And somehow we still keep having child sexual abuse. We still keep having child murders. We still keep having all this bad stuff. And there are some reasons for that. And I guess you guys want to hear what they are. A lot of survivors get into advocacy at a very early part of their healing. A big fundamental piece of healing when you are a trauma survivor is being able to talk about your trauma. And the first time you do this, you think you're going to die, and you don't. And then the second or third time you do it, it's a little less painful. And then, especially if you're able to talk to other people and you feel a connection and you feel supported and you make them feel supported, you start to think, just very normal and natural things for people to think is, I'm going to keep doing this because this is changing the world. I'm making myself feel better and I'm making other people feel better. So this is going to change the world, doggone it. And it does, in a way. But then people think, well, okay, I'm changing the world, so I'm going to try to change laws because there are laws that need to be changed. Well, yes, there are. But you need to understand what those laws are. And most people don't understand that at all. I mean, I was talking with a grandfather today whose granddaughter got killed, and now he's bound and determined that he's going to fix CPS. But before this miserable abuse thing started with his granddaughter, I don't think he knew what CPS was, and most people don't. And that's okay, but you cannot expect you're going to come up with an intelligent solution to a complex problem if you don't really, 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 really understand that problem, and you don't really understand what some good solutions are, and you're not connected to a knowledge base, and you're not connected to resources and experts about it. One of the ways I got kind of lucky was I was volunteering for and then joined the board for a not-for-profit, Prevent Child Abuse New York, which is a very well-respected, intelligent organization that was involved in things like setting CPS up 40 years ago and involved in just a lot of really the research-based, the academic-based child welfare stuff. So I did actually get to learn a lot about the fundamentals of how we protect children through the legal system before we got this going. And I was able to learn a lot about the basics of legislative advocacy before I really found my voice as an advocate, before I told anybody at all, particularly anybody there, that I am an abuse survivor. So that's not the way most people do it, but I think it worked very well for me because I kind of learned the hard stuff, or what for a lot of people is the hard stuff, before I had figured out how to make my own self work, before I'd been able to figure out what I could contribute from my own story, from my own experience, from my own life. So that kind of helped me out a lot. So then, survivors go through these phases, and they're talking about it, they want to change the world. So they very often will come up with an idea. Just if this one little thing had happened, I wouldn't have been abused, or my abuse would have been stopped much earlier, or there would have been some much better outcome. And they get very attached to that. And they can usually find a lawyer or a lawmaker or somebody who can write down that idea and make it into a bill. And either, in the broadest of strokes, either the bill goes forward or it doesn't. If the bill doesn't go forward, usually the survivor turned advocate burns out. And we'll get to that in a minute. And if it does go forward, it's probably because they're either very, very, very powerful, their story is very, very powerful, their story gets a lot of press, or they connected with a legislator who is very, very good and very, very powerful and is really able to push this bill through. It's much easier to push through an insignificant bill that doesn't do much than it is to push forward a really significant bill. Because a really significant bill is going to affect a lot of people and change the way a lot of people do business. Nobody wants that. It's real easy to pass something that doesn't make much change, but maybe it bears the name of a dead child, or it bears the name of a really charismatic survivor. So, and that's what usually happens. So then you get into the whole idea of survivors burning out. And I've seen a lot of this, especially in statute of limitations reform. When you are healing, when you are conquering trauma, one of the things you learn to tell your story. And ideally, the first bunch of times you tell it to supporting people. And it's so attached to you. It is so much of your history. It is so much pain. It's so much trauma. It's so much of you that you're talking about it now. You're really proud of yourself, and you think you're going to change the whole world. Oh, thank you. You think that your story is going to change the world, and when it doesn't, it is heartbreaking. It is devastating. It is like being abused again. All of the sudden, especially if part of your story was telling people who didn't listen to you or didn't believe you, and now all of a sudden you're telling lawmakers, you're telling voters, you're telling all these people, and they apparently don't believe you, or they apparently don't care because they're not doing what you want them to do. That is really, really devastating. And I've been active in statute of limitations reform now. I've been very active in it for 7 years. There are very few of us who have been active in it for 7 years. Every year there's a new, I see new survivors who come and testify, and most of the years I don't see them again. Now that there's Facebook, now that we all have business cards, we connect a little bit and we try to look out for each other a little bit. But we know what's going to happen at that first press conference when they have this year's new survivor up there. We know this person is probably not in a really good phase in their recovery, and life is, their life is about to get worse if this, it is. Smarter legislators, some people understand trauma and understand trauma survivors a little bit more and can try to do things to be a little bit more humane and a little bit more trauma informed. Some don't get it at all. Some of them realize that what might be most kind and humane for a survivor might not be what they really need to get the bill passed. It might not be how they get headlines, how they get media, which really is essential in getting significant controversial bills passed. So it's just a balancing act, and people, when to see that your story is not changing the world, that's just incredibly invalidating, and a lot of people burn out over that. Hang on. So people either persist or they don't. And if they're seeing success, if they're not seeing any success, if people are not seeing anything happening, it's, it's re-traumatizing. People usually stop telling their story, just the way children do if they're, a child who's being abused might disclose or might partially disclose. If no one abuses that, no one believes them or helps them, they stop. They recant, or they just stop telling. Even as adults, and even if we know academically that that's what happens, we still do it, even if it's not conscious. And so that, that's what happens with a lot of survivors who are doing this. But under the best of circumstances, when you've got people who really know what they're doing, and they've got a team of legislators, of advocates, of media, etc., 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 who really each understand the piece that they play and really have the drive to get it done, stuff does get done, and stuff does happen, and significant bills do get passed. It's a challenge, it really is. With statute of limitations reform this year, I think we might actually get it, largely because the movie Spotlight came out in 2015. That drew a lot of attention to child sexual abuse. The attention grew into media attention, and the New York Daily News published articles about it almost every day for 3 months, and still publishes a lot. So there's a huge amount of media attention on it now, and that has gotten legislators' attention on it, and that drew a lot of survivors into the mix. And enough of them, there's kind of a critical mass, and that if someone can't go to one event, somebody else can. And we can work, we've got some better legislators involved now who are a little bit smarter and can say things, who can give constructive criticism and can give it in ways that it actually is constructive. That's another interesting thing as a survivor working with populations who generally aren't, like legislators, is that a lot of people have trouble telling, they're so shocked when they hear a survivor's story. They're so shocked. And they don't feel that they can say anything about that other than, wow, or I'm so sorry. And that's good and that's validating. But if you're not telling your story properly, if you're not making the point that needs to be made, someone needs to be able to provide you with constructive criticism, or else that point is not ever going to be made, and people aren't going to learn what they need to learn and do what they need to do. So that's another challenge where survivors are almost killed with kindness. Nobody does what they need to do to critique, to say, hey, this is what you need to express at this press event, when you're writing this, when you're testifying, whatever. You need to hit home on these points. One of the things that's really interesting with my organization now is that we're all survivors, so that makes it a little bit easier. It's not like an outsider's telling you this. And we also don't, we're doing this because we want to make change happen. We're doing this because we want to do it right. And you have to be at a certain phase in order to try to do that, and you have to have the networks, the support, and the knowledge to do something right. I'll give you an example of a survivor who's doing, I think, the wrong thing the right way. And this is, I don't think she's a bad person. I don't think her bill's bad. I don't think it's all that good either. Is Erin Marin, who tries to pass a bill in all 50 states that mandates that children are taught, given a basic lesson about child sex abuse in an age-appropriate way. Well, in and of itself, that's fine. But, okay, so you teach kids about sexual abuse, and especially if the goal of it is to teach children to disclose. Well, the evidence is when a child discloses abuse, usually they tell somebody who doesn't believe them or who doesn't do anything to protect them. That's very unfortunate, and it's very ugly. And it's very easy for a lot of survivors to say, hey, if I had just told, my life would have been better. Well, that's because it's easier to imagine that than it's to imagine having a parent who says, who said, oh, you're lying, oh, stop that, or, much worse, which does happen. But the bill passes in the states it passes in because it's, okay, we're just going to make schools do one more thing, we're just going to sign a law, it's not going to cost a lot of money, and poof, we've done something. In some states, it's like New York, actually, it's moving incredibly slowly because New York went through that phase a long time ago when we're going to make schools teach everything under the sun and not give them any more money. And so the teachers' unions have put their arches up, their hackles up, and are resisting now anything. Again, I don't think it's necessarily a bad idea. And if you pay attention to how she tries to get the bill passed and everything, in a lot of ways, she's very good at her advocacy. It's a short-sighted bill. It's not terribly effective. But again, she's at least incredibly persistent and has gone through all of the pieces of healing and recovery that one needs to go through to get stuff passed. So, like I said, here we are. New York is in its 11th year of statute of limitations reform. I think 2017 is likely to be the year. A lot of other bills, child welfare bills, have passed in 11 years. Some of them have had something to do with child sexual abuse, but they can't possibly do much until we get rid of the statute of limitations, because that is what keeps most offenders on the streets. So, I hope you found that helpful, and thanks a lot.